What if the story you thought you knew about Exodus did not begin with plagues or miracles, but with a quiet question that still echoes today? What happens when a single life becomes the turning point for an entire nation? The book opens not with triumph, but with a strange silence, the kind that hangs over a people who have waited too long for help. Egypt appears strong on the surface, but beneath the order and wealth, something begins to shift. A forgotten promise wakes. A hidden plan slowly takes shape, and before any sign becomes visible, the story is already moving toward a moment that will change history. This is the beginning of a journey where nothing is random, and every detail prepares the stage for something greater. The people of Israel live under oppression, but their suffering is not the start of despair. It is the moment where the question forms, does God still see them? Their cries rise in the night, unnoticed by the empire around them. Yet the text hints that these cries are not lost. They move somewhere higher. They reach someone who remembers a covenant spoken long before any Pharaoh was born. While Egypt expands its control, a different kind of preparation quietly unfolds far from the throne room. The story takes us not to a battlefield or a council of leaders, but to a child whose life should have ended before it began. A decree spreads through Egypt. Every Hebrew boy is to be thrown into the Nile. It looks final. It looks unbreakable. But the first disruption to this command comes from ordinary people acting with courage that does not fit the moment they live in. A mother hides her newborn. She works fast, using what little she has. She places him in a basket, seals it, and sets him on the same river that was meant to destroy him. The current moves, and with it a question the audience is not meant to ignore. How does a life survive against a power that claims to control everything? The basket drifts into the path of Pharaoh's daughter. Her compassion interrupts the order of the empire. She lifts the child, names him Moses, and raises him as her own. The one who will later confront Egypt grows up inside its very center of authority. The contrast pulls the viewer deeper. It feels strange, deliberate, almost planned. The person who should have been erased becomes the person who will expose the limits of Pharaoh's strength. Moses grows and sees the forced labor around him. He tries to act in his own way, and his choice forces him to flee into the wilderness. The shift is sudden. One moment, he is in the palace. The next, he becomes a stranger in an unfamiliar land. Many stories end there with exile and silence, but the narrative of Exodus uses exile as a preparation. Moses spends years in Midian, far from Egypt's influence. He marries, he becomes a shepherd. His life looks ordinary, almost still, yet the story does not lose tension here. It builds something quieter, readiness. One day, while tending the flock, Moses sees a bush burning without being consumed. The detail is simple but strange enough to stop him. The moment he turns aside, the tone of the story changes. A voice calls his name. It is direct and personal. Moses answers. This exchange is the real beginning of Exodus because it removes any doubt about whether God sees the suffering of his people. He speaks, he declares that he has heard their cries, he has seen their bondage, he remembers his covenant, and he has come down to act. The call given to Moses is overwhelming. He is told to return to Egypt, to confront Pharaoh, and to lead the Israelites out. Nothing in his past makes him feel ready for this. He questions his identity. He doubts his ability. But every hesitation is met with reassurance. God tells him, "I will be with you." This becomes the anchor of the entire mission. Moses asks for God's name, and the answer is unlike anything recorded before. I am who I am. A name that does not depend on time, power structures, or human permission. A name that stands alone. Moses receives signs to prove his calling. A staff becomes a serpent and returns to a staff. His hand becomes diseased and then healed. Water turns to blood. These signs are not meant as entertainment. They are reminders that the mission is not based on Moses' ability. They are signals that something larger is moving, something that will confront every part of Egypt's belief system. Moses still resists, and the tension rises. The viewer senses the weight of the task, yet God continues to push the story forward by providing Aaron as a companion. When Moses finally agrees to return, the journey is no longer about a man finding purpose. It becomes a narrative about a God who steps into history and demands a response from the most powerful empire of its time. Moses walks back toward the land he once fled, the quiet wilderness behind him, the conflict ahead of him. The audience understands this moment as the line where the story leaves preparation and enters confrontation. Every detail so far has served a purpose: the suffering, the rescue of the infant, the exile, the burning bush, the revelation of the divine name. All of it leads the viewer to ask one thing: what will happen when Moses stands before Pharaoh and speaks the words God commanded? The tension is not only political or personal, it is spiritual. It is cosmic. It is the beginning of a direct challenge between human authority and divine intention. If this opening drew you in and made you want to see how Moses will face Pharaoh, comment the word "awakening" and leave a like so this story reaches more people who love deep biblical content. No one expected the shift to begin with a silence. Not a silence of peace, but a silence that forms when a nation tries to hold its breath under the weight of something it cannot control. The Israelites lived through this silence every day. It stretched over their homes, their work, and the years that kept passing without change. They were many, yet powerless, strong, yet restricted, growing in number, yet shrinking in freedom. Egypt watched their growth and felt threatened, and the fear of one ruler became the suffering of an entire people. What started as subtle pressure soon hardened into a system designed to break them. Pharaoh believed control was the answer: stronger labor, stricter commands, longer hours. Under the heat of the sun, his intention was simple: weaken the people before they could rise, but something unexpected happened. The more they were oppressed, the more they increased. This created a tension Egypt could not ignore. The audience senses that something is building beneath the surface, and every attempt to suppress the people only reveals how unstoppable the promise over them truly is. Still, Pharaoh believed he could end the threat, and so he gave the order that would define the darkest part of their history. Every Hebrew boy was to be thrown into the Nile. The command was final, cold, public, the kind of order that sends shockwaves through a community and forces parents to hide their children with no sense of safety. Yet even in this darkness, small acts of courage continue to interrupt the narrative. Midwives who choose life over fear, mothers who refuse to surrender their children, families who carry hope despite the danger around them. These early moments form the emotional foundation of the story. They show how a nation can live at the edge of despair while still believing that a breakthrough is possible. But the viewer is invited to look deeper. The people do not only suffer physically, they suffer spiritually. Egypt worships a complex system of gods, each linked to nature and life. Every year the rituals continue. Every season the cycle repeats. But for the Israelites, these rituals are reminders of a world that does not belong to them. They remember the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They hold on to a covenant that seems far away, and they ask the question many viewers know too well: does God see us? Time moves, but the suffering does not. Generations pass without change. And then the narrative pauses at a crucial statement inside the text. Their cry went up to God. This moment is not an emotional line. It is a turning point. The story reveals that their groans have reached the same God who spoke promises long before their ancestors entered Egypt. The viewer feels the shift even before any action takes place. Something begins to move behind the scenes, and the silence that once defined their suffering is now the signal that God is preparing to intervene. This is where the tension increases. Egypt still believes it holds complete control. Pharaoh still believes his gods protect his throne. The Israelites still wake up each day to the same exhaustion, but the narrative is no longer about their condition. It is about the response that is forming. The moment God remembers his covenant is the moment the destiny of the nation changes direction. Not because the people are strong enough to fight, but because the promise spoken to their fathers still stands. As viewers follow the story, the emotional pressure builds around one question: what will God do next? The people do not know that Moses has already encountered the burning bush. They do not see the preparation happening in the wilderness. Their reality still looks unchanged. This creates a psychological hook. The audience is invited to feel the tension between what is happening on the surface and what is happening beyond their sight. It encourages them to stay engaged, because they know something significant is approaching, even if the characters do not. When Moses finally returns to Egypt, he does not come as a prince. He comes as a messenger. The staff in his hand is not a weapon, but a sign. The words he is about to speak will challenge the highest authority in the land. But before this confrontation occurs, the text guides us back to the emotional core of the people. They listen to Moses and Aaron. They hear that God has seen their suffering. For the first time in years, hope rises, yet hope alone is not enough to break chains, and Pharaoh responds with anger. Instead of releasing the Israelites, he intensifies their burden. The reaction is predictable but still painful. The viewer feels the emotional impact of this setback. The people doubt Moses. Moses questions himself. The tension escalates. But this is the pattern Exodus uses to create anticipation. Each moment that seems like a failure is positioned to amplify the power of what comes next. Moses returns to God, and the response he receives is firm. God declares that he will bring his people out with a strong hand. He repeats his covenant. He assures Moses that the deliverance will not depend on human strength. The viewer understands this as a transition from preparation to action. The suffering is no longer the center of the story. The coming confrontation is. This part closes with the atmosphere shifting around Egypt. The people still work under oppression. Pharaoh still believes he cannot be challenged, but the audience now knows something the characters are just beginning to realize. God has entered the story in a direct and undeniable way. The cries that once seemed lost have become the reason the entire nation will witness events unlike anything they have seen before. The silence is ending. The narrative is preparing for impact. If this part kept you watching until the end, comment "He hears" and leave a like so more people can follow this journey. There is a moment in every story where the quiet preparation ends and the confrontation begins. In Exodus, that moment arrives not with an army gathering strength, but with two men walking toward a palace that once represented everything Moses left behind. The atmosphere shifts as they approach Egypt. It feels as though the land itself is preparing for something it has never witnessed. Moses carries the weight of a calling that still feels impossible. Aaron walks beside him, steady but unsure of how a shepherd and a former prince could stand before the most powerful ruler of their time. The tension is immediate. The viewer senses the collision that is about to unfold. The first steps back into Egypt are heavy. Moses has changed. He is no longer the man who fled after acting in anger. He has encountered the voice from the burning bush and carries signs that reveal a power Egypt does not understand. Yet even with this divine assurance, his human thoughts do not disappear. He knows Pharaoh. He knows the structure of the court. He knows the pride embedded in the throne. Every detail of his past rises as he moves closer to the center of Egyptian power. This contrast adds depth to the scene. It makes the viewer realize that courage does not erase fear. Courage proceeds despite it. When Moses and Aaron enter Pharaoh's presence, the tension reaches its peak. The hall is filled with symbols of authority. Statues of gods stand like silent witnesses. Every movement reflects the confidence of an empire that has never been challenged by anything outside its borders. Pharaoh sits with the ease of someone who believes the world responds to his command. Into this environment, Moses speaks words that no one in that room expects to hear. He delivers a message not from himself, but from the God who calls himself, I am. The command is direct. Let his people go. Pharaoh's reaction is sharp. He does not ask for details. He does not consider negotiation. He questions the identity of the God Moses represents, because in his worldview, no power exists outside the pantheon he knows. This moment is more than defiance. It is the beginning of a spiritual confrontation. The viewer feels the shift instantly. The struggle is no longer about labor or freedom. It is about whose authority defines reality. The question hangs in the air. Who is the Lord that Pharaoh should obey him? Instead of giving in, Pharaoh retaliates. He increases the burden on the Israelites. He demands the same output with fewer resources. The people suffer, and their frustration returns to Moses. The emotional impact is strong. Moses doubts himself again. He questions why he was sent. The conflict is not only external, but internal. Yet this struggle is essential for the story's progression. It prepares the audience for what God is about to reveal. God responds to Moses with clarity. The deliverance will not depend on Pharaoh's willingness. The deliverance will show exactly who the Lord is. Moses and Aaron return to the palace. This time, they carry more than a message. They carry signs that challenge Egypt's systems. When Aaron throws down his staff and it becomes a serpent, the court reacts with surprise. Pharaoh calls his magicians and they perform a similar act. For a moment, it appears equal. But then, something unexpected happens. Aaron's serpent swallows the serpents of the magicians, a symbolic act that reveals a deeper truth. Imitation cannot stand against authentic power. Pharaoh still refuses. The story moves forward with a growing sense of anticipation. The viewer understands that this is only the beginning. What comes next will not be a single sign, but a cascade of events that expose the limitations of Egypt's gods. Moses stands again by the Nile. He raises his staff. The river turns to blood. The lifeline of Egypt becomes a symbol of judgment. Yet even here, Pharaoh tries to hold control. He turns away. His heart hardens. The tension deepens. This pattern continues. Each sign challenges a different aspect of Egyptian belief. Frogs fill the land, dust becomes gnats, swarms spread across Egypt. The magicians attempt to replicate the acts, but eventually they reach a limit. They admit that what they are witnessing is not trickery. They tell Pharaoh that this is the finger of God. His response does not change. His refusal sets the stage for greater demonstrations of power. Every sign increases the divide between Pharaoh and the will of God. Every refusal pushes the narrative forward. The viewer feels the build-up. They know something larger is forming. The spiritual confrontation is becoming clearer. This is no longer a simple conflict between a leader and his people. It is a declaration that no earthly throne can resist divine purpose. As Moses continues to confront Pharaoh, the emotional intensity grows. The viewer sees the fear rising among Egypt's advisors. They see the frustration of the people. They see the resilience of Moses, not because he is naturally fearless, but because the mission is larger than he is. The story keeps drawing the audience deeper. They want to know how far Pharaoh will push his defiance. They want to know what the next sign will reveal. They want to understand why God escalates the confrontation with such precision. Moses becomes a symbol of persistence. Each time he enters the palace, he walks into a room where he is not welcomed. Each time he speaks, he delivers a message that will be rejected, but he continues because he has seen the one who sent him. This is the psychological anchor for the audience. They recognize that the battle is not about who speaks the loudest, but about whose authority stands behind the message. As the signs grow stronger and the resistance grows harder, the tension reaches a point where the viewer cannot look away. They sense that the story is approaching a moment of irreversible change. Pharaoh's pride is now a barrier that affects the entire nation. The conflict is moving toward a breaking point, and every sign brings the narrative closer to that line. By the time this part ends, one truth becomes clear. The confrontation between Moses and Pharaoh is not a story of equal opponents. It is a story designed to reveal the power of a God who does not yield to human resistance. And the audience knows that the most intense moments are still ahead. If this chapter pulled you into the growing tension between Moses and Pharaoh, comment, "I see the signs," and leave a like so more people can join the journey. There comes a point in every unfolding story when the tension that has been building no longer asks for attention, it demands it. In Exodus, that point arrives the moment Pharaoh realizes something he has never faced before. He is losing control. The early signs that Moses displayed were enough to unsettle Egypt, but they were not yet enough to break the pride of its ruler. Now the narrative reaches a turning line, where hesitation ends and a sequence of divine acts begins. These moments are not random. They are deliberate pressures placed against a heart that refuses to soften. And with every act, the viewer is pulled deeper into a confrontation that grows more intense. The first plague strikes with a sense of irreversible change. Moses raises his staff over the Nile, and the water turns to blood. It affects the river, the streams, the pools, and even the vessels used to store water. The source of life becomes unusable. The audience feels the weight of this moment because they understand the Nile is more than water. It is Egypt's identity. Yet Pharaoh watches, evaluates, and turns away. His magicians copy the sign, and he convinces himself that nothing divine is happening. This refusal sets the stage for what follows. It becomes clear that each plague will not only challenge Egypt's comfort, but confront its belief system. The next escalation arrives quickly. Frogs cover the land. They enter the homes, the beds, the ovens, and every place the people consider safe. It becomes impossible for Egypt to ignore what is happening. Still, Pharaoh negotiates only when the discomfort affects him personally. He asks Moses to remove the frogs, promises obedience, and breaks his word as soon as relief comes. His heart returns to defiance, showing the viewer that the struggle is not about the plagues themselves, but about the resistance within the one who holds authority. As the third plague arrives, the tone shifts. Dust becomes gnats, rising and spreading through Egypt in a way the magicians cannot reproduce. For the first time, the magicians speak honestly. They tell Pharaoh that this is the finger of God. This moment should have been a turning point, but Pharaoh refuses to listen. His denial of what his own advisors recognize reveals the depth of his pride. The viewer feels the tension increasing, knowing that each hardened response pushes the narrative toward even stronger signs. The plagues that follow begin affecting not only comfort, but structure. Swarms spread across the land, livestock die, boils break out on man and beast. The hierarchy of Egypt shakes as priests become unclean and rituals collapse. The people begin to fear what Moses will announce next. Pharaoh begins to understand that each refusal leads to a greater consequence, yet he still tries to control the situation, negotiating conditions rather than surrendering. The viewer notices the psychological struggle. Pharaoh believes that compromise can protect his authority, but the plagues reveal that partial obedience is not obedience at all. Then the story shifts into a new intensity. Hail falls with fire, destroying crops, fields, and trees. It becomes clear that nature itself responds to the command God gives Moses. Advisors warn Pharaoh that Egypt is breaking under the weight of resistance. Some officials even bring their livestock inside after hearing the warning, recognizing that Moses' predictions always come true. This division inside Pharaoh's court reveals the beginning of internal collapse. Even so, Pharaoh repeats his pattern. He admits guilt, asks for relief, and as soon as the hail stops, he returns to defiance. The viewer senses a growing pattern interruption here. Each plague resolves, but instead of bringing stability, it leaves behind stronger anticipation for what comes next. This structure keeps the audience engaged because it mirrors the rising and falling of emotional intensity. They see the buildup, they expect escalation, and they understand that the climax is approaching. Locusts arrive, they cover the land and consume everything the hail left behind. Egypt has never seen devastation like this. At this point, Pharaoh's officials plead with him to let the Israelites go. They tell him Egypt is ruined. Their desperation shows how much the plagues have shifted the balance of power. Pharaoh summons Moses, tries again to negotiate, and fails once more. His desire for control outweighs the warnings around him. When darkness falls across Egypt, it lasts 3 days, not partial, not symbolic, but complete absence of light. The people do not leave their houses. The silence across the land becomes heavy. It is the kind of stillness that reveals fear without words. Yet even in this darkness, Pharaoh refuses to surrender. The viewer realizes that the tension is no longer about the plagues. It is about the confrontation between human defiance and divine intention. Something final must happen, something that cannot be ignored, replicated, or dismissed. Then Moses delivers the message of the final plague. The firstborn in every household will die. The viewer feels the shift immediately. The tone becomes solemn, not loud. This plague is not a display of chaos. It is a declaration of judgment. It is the moment where the narrative reaches its unavoidable peak. Moses explains that the Israelites must mark their doorposts with the blood of a lamb, so the destroyer will pass over them. This instruction introduces a level of preparation that separates Israel from Egypt. The audience senses the deep significance here as this act becomes a defining moment for generations. Night comes. Egypt waits without knowing what is approaching. The Israelites gather in their homes, ready to leave at any moment. Then it happens. A cry rises across the land. It spreads from house to house, reaching every family. Touched by the final plague, even Pharaoh's household is struck. The tension that has held the story together reaches release. Pharaoh calls Moses and Aaron in the night and tells them to leave. Not later, not after discussion, immediately. Egypt gives them goods, urging them to depart quickly. The narrative moves with momentum now. The Israelites prepare, gather their belongings, and begin their journey. The destination is not fully clear to them, but the direction is. This transition from captivity to movement is the emotional release the viewer has been waiting for. Yet even in this moment of departure, there is a sense that the story is not finished. Something in Pharaoh remains unbroken. Something in the narrative continues forward, inviting the audience to stay alert for what comes next. As the people stand at the threshold of freedom, the plagues have accomplished more than punishment. They have revealed the limits of human authority and the extent of divine power. They have shown that a hardened heart can shape the destiny of an entire nation, and they prepare the audience for a moment even greater than the ones they have witnessed so far. If this chapter kept you engaged and wanting more, comment the turning point and leave a like so more people can follow this journey. Freedom often begins with celebration, but the journey that follows tests whether a people are ready to carry that freedom. After the dramatic escape from Egypt and the overwhelming victory at the Red Sea, the Israelites step into a new reality. The sounds of rushing water fade behind them, replaced by a landscape that stretches far beyond what they imagined. The wilderness waits, not as an enemy, but as a place where the next stage of their story will unfold. It does not announce its lessons. It reveals them slowly, forcing the people to confront what they believed about God, about themselves, and about the path ahead. At first, the people move with excitement. They have witnessed judgment and deliverance. They have seen Egypt collapse. They have heard the voice of Moses declaring God's power, but excitement does not sustain a journey. The wilderness begins pressing against their expectations. There is no food, there is no water, there is no schedule. The viewer feels the shift immediately. The dramatic intensity of Egypt is replaced by a quieter challenge, one that tests the heart rather than the senses. This contrast keeps the audience engaged because the new conflict feels personal. It is not about escaping an enemy. It is about surviving uncertainty. The complaints begin slowly, building like pressure in a closed space. The people remember Egypt not as a place of torment, but as a place where food was predictable. This selective memory introduces emotional tension. The audience knows Egypt was cruel, yet the Israelites speak as though bondage was easier than dependence. This psychological tension becomes a key retention point. It invites the viewer to wonder how a people who saw miracles could still struggle with trust. God responds to their hunger, not with judgment, but with provision. Each morning, something unfamiliar appears on the ground. Moses explains that it is the bread God has given them. They call it manna. It arrives daily, enough for each day and no more. This teaches them a new rhythm, trust for the next sunrise. The viewer sees the pattern forming. The wilderness becomes a classroom where the people learn dependence instead of fear. When thirst rises later, God answers again through water flowing from a rock. These moments show continuity between the God who parted the sea and the God who shapes daily necessities. As the people continue, the wilderness reveals another threat. Amalek attacks. The tension rises instantly because the danger is not environmental but human. Moses stands on a hill while Joshua leads the battle. When Moses raises his hands, Israel prevails. When his hands lower, Amalek gains strength. The mystical element returns here in a way that builds anticipation. Moses cannot hold his arms up alone. Aaron and Hur support him, and the people overcome their enemy. The soul. Viewer recognizes the layered meaning in this moment. Victory comes through unity, intercession, and perseverance. It becomes another pattern interrupt, reminding the audience that the wilderness is unpredictable and filled with different forms of struggle. After this battle, the journey brings the people to the base of a mountain unlike any other in their lives. Mount Sinai rises with a presence that feels alive. The text builds a sense of anticipation, letting the viewer know that something monumental is approaching. The people camp at its base as Moses ascends to meet with God. What follows shifts the tone entirely. Thunder echoes, clouds thicken, the mountain trembles. The people sense the magnitude of what is happening. This is not another rescue. It is a revelation. God speaks, declaring that the Israelites are his treasured possession, a nation set apart. These words introduce a new identity, not forced like Egypt's oppression, but offered as a calling. The viewer feels the narrative expand. The story is no longer about deliverance alone. It is about purpose. Moses receives the commandments, principles that define how a people connected to God must live. They are not random rules. They reveal the character of the one who brought them out of Egypt. They set a foundation for justice, community, respect, and devotion. As Moses descends and delivers these commandments, the people agree. Their voices unite. They promise obedience. This moment of unity holds emotional weight because it signals a shift from physical liberation to spiritual formation. But the narrative does not linger here. It continues forward, drawing the audience deeper into the unfolding transformation. God gives Moses instructions for something new, a sanctuary, not a palace, not a monument, but a place where God will dwell among them. The details are specific. The materials are valuable. The design is precise. The purpose is profound. The viewer senses the importance of this structure. It represents presence, not distance. The people who once wondered if God heard their cries will now carry a symbol of his nearness wherever they go. The tabernacle becomes a project that involves everyone. Men and women bring offerings. Skilled workers craft each element with intention. The narrative shows how community forms through shared purpose. The viewer remains engaged through the steady progression of this construction. Each item has meaning. Each instruction contributes to a larger design. The tabernacle holds the ark, the lampstand, the altar, the veil. It stands as the physical expression of relationship between God and his people. The priests are appointed and clothed in garments that reflect responsibility and holiness. Their role is not political. It is spiritual. They become mediators between the people and the presence of God. This introduces a new layer of the story. The wilderness is no longer just a path. It becomes sacred ground where God establishes a system that reflects his order and his desire to remain close. When the tabernacle is finally assembled, something extraordinary happens. A cloud covers the tent. The glory of the Lord fills the space. Moses cannot enter because the presence is overwhelming. The viewer feels the significance of this moment. It connects the earlier events at Sinai to the camp where the people live. It shows that the same God who descended on the mountain now chooses to dwell among them. As the story progresses, the cloud becomes their guide. When it lifts, they move. When it settles, they stay. This creates a living rhythm of dependence and direction. The viewer sees a pattern forming again, but this time it is not about what the people lack. It is about who leads them. This part of the narrative closes with a deep sense of wonder. The people who once cried out under bondage now travel with the presence of God in their midst. The wilderness remains difficult, but it is no longer empty. Every step forward becomes a reminder that they are not wandering alone. If this part drew you deeper into the journey and helped you see the wilderness in a new way, comment "He dwells" and leave a like so more viewers can join the experience. There are moments in a story when the atmosphere shifts so suddenly that even the audience feels the weight of it before the characters do. After the tabernacle is built and the presence of God fills the camp, everything seems stable. The people finally have direction, structure, and a sense of identity. Yet Exodus does something unexpected here. It turns the story inward. It reveals that freedom given is not the same as freedom understood. The greatest challenges no longer come from Egypt or the wilderness, but from the human heart that struggles to remain loyal even after witnessing the impossible. The turning point begins quietly. Moses ascends the mountain again, entering a cloud where God continues to give instructions. The people wait at the bottom, but the waiting grows longer than they expected. Days pass, then weeks. Time stretches without explanation, and the silence becomes dangerous. The same people, who once trembled at God's voice, now begin to question whether Moses will return at all. This emotional shift is powerful because it reveals something universal. When the visible signs disappear, doubts rise quickly. The pressure builds until the people reach a moment of collapse. They approach Aaron and demand something that shocks the viewer. They ask for a visible representation of the God who brought them out of Egypt. They want something to see, something to touch, something that fills the silence Moses left behind. Aaron agrees. He collects gold, melts it, and shapes it into a calf. The act itself interrupts the narrative with a sense of disbelief. How can a people who saw the Red Sea open now bow before something made by human hands? The emotional tension here pulls the viewer into the contradiction, making them question how quickly trust can shift when uncertainty grows. The celebration that follows is loud, chaotic, and careless. The camp that once focused on God's presence fills with noise and confusion. At the top of the mountain, God tells Moses what has happened. The words carry a tone of sorrow and anger. The covenant that had just begun is breaking. Moses descends with the stone tablets, and as he nears the camp, he sees the golden calf and the people dancing around it. The moment hits with full emotional force. Without hesitation, Moses throws the tablets to the ground, breaking them in a dramatic declaration that the covenant has been shattered. The confrontation that follows reveals layers of disappointment, discipline, and responsibility. Moses destroys the calf, burns it, grinds it into powder, and makes the people drink it. He confronts Aaron, whose excuses show how fear can distort judgment. The Levites step forward when Moses calls for those who choose loyalty. Their decision leads to difficult consequences in the camp, showing that rebellion is never without cost. This scene shifts the emotional tone again, from shock to reflection. It becomes clear that this moment is not about punishment alone, but about revealing the weight of unfaithfulness. Moses returns to God and does something unexpected. He intercedes. He pleads for the people. He even offers himself as a substitute, if that is what it takes, for their forgiveness. The viewer feels the emotional depth of this moment. It builds curiosity about what kind of relationship Moses has developed with God and why he is willing to give everything for a people who often blame him. God responds with a mix of justice and mercy. He punishes the sin but does not abandon the nation. The covenant will be renewed, but the people must understand the seriousness of their commitment. What follows is one of the most profound moments in the entire story. God reveals his character to Moses, not through signs or plagues, but through a declaration: compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, rich in love, faithful to his promises, yet just in his judgments. This revelation becomes the heart of the renewed covenant. The viewer realizes that Exodus is not only about deliverance, but about understanding who God is in the midst of human weakness. Moses returns with new tablets, new instructions, and a renewed mission. The people rebuild what they had broken. They complete the tabernacle. They follow the commands. They participate in the process of restoration. The narrative moves forward with careful pacing, showing how renewal requires both divine mercy and human response. The cloud of God's presence returns, settling over the tabernacle, and once again, the people understand that they are not alone. From this point forward, the journey becomes guided. The cloud lifts when it is time to move, and settles when it is time to stay. This visual guidance reflects a deeper truth. Their future will not be shaped by their failures, but by God's ongoing presence. This creates a powerful emotional shift for the viewer. The story no longer feels like a sequence of events. It becomes a relationship formed through struggle, revelation, and patience. As the narrative closes, the themes woven throughout Exodus become clear. Redemption is not only the escape from bondage, it is the transformation of identity. Covenant is not just a set of rules, it is a commitment that requires faith from both sides. Presence is not limited to dramatic moments. It becomes a daily reality that guides, shapes, and sustains. The viewer is invited to reflect on how these themes extend beyond the ancient world and into their own life. The story ends with the people moving forward, carrying the presence of God with them. The promised land lies ahead, not yet reached but already shaping their direction. The viewer senses the open ending, understanding that Exodus does not finish the story. It prepares the way for the chapters that follow. The lessons of the wilderness, the weight of covenant, and the promise of presence continue shaping the identity of a nation and the narrative of Scripture. If this final chapter helped you understand the heart of Exodus on a deeper level, comment "He leads" me so I know you reached the end, and make sure to subscribe to the channel if you want to continue receiving this content.